Thank you, David. Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, Mariana. We've covered a lot of territory here in just 30 minutes. And we have a few questions coming in, which I think will serve us well for a roundtable discussion. The first is curious as to which dev resources are most neglected in the open banking companies. And I think a follow-on question to that is, what are the implications of these layers of policy and regulatory compliance on DX? Do they have a specific effect on how you build out a developer program?
Well, I can answer that. Just a few days ago when we were preparing for this event, David was pointing out that they've realized that there are some resources in the developer portals, but however, there are some of them that are not actually working right. So that is very crucial, because what's the point of having resources if they are not going to work, right? So, for example, one of the resources he mentioned was the sandbox. In some cases, sandbox are not working. So, I mean, that's why I think, and we encourage firms to, check what you have, do quality checks, try your sandbox, use your developer portal as if you were a developer that wanted to use your developer portal, right? So, I mean, at Platformable right now, we're not doing the quality check of developer portals. We're just counting the elements that are available for developers. But it's very interesting, this point that, yeah, you know what, you just don't have, you can't just have resources. You need to make sure that they work well. Now, from a regulatory perspective, some regulations, for example, in Mexico and some others, they require the companies to have certain minimum requirements in the developer portals, as it would be the sandbox, as it would be a contact person or a contact area, to solve problems, for disputes. So there are some, in some countries, it has been requested by authorities to have minimum requirements in the communication with the community, right? So, yeah, basically that is the indication. What will happen with regulators? That there are rules for certain developer portals. What will happen if they realize that they don't work? And certainly they will have an observation, right? So it is really important to make sure that what you are putting available to the community, that it really works.
Yeah, and just a quick follow-up to that. In terms of the policy and the regulatory environment, does that create an additional overhead for kind of onboarding new developers through the journey?
I don't think it should create an additional overhead. I mean, that's something that that firms would need to have, with or without regulation, right? I mean, firms in market-driven ecosystems, they need to have that, and because that's the way that the developers will come to them, will approach them, and will want to use their APIs. I mean, having a good, offering a good developer experience, mandated or not, has to attract developers, and that is a way that innovation will thrive.
Great.
I come back to what I just mentioned in the beginning was your API is a product, so treat it like a product. And so, yes, it's going to need to have some support around it. Who would have thought? It's going to need a place where developers can do that test, a sandbox. That's really important. And the other piece I wanted to mention as part of that is, just because a developer has built with something, has built something with your API, you can't then step away. because there's going to be some upgrades to that. Have you let them know? Have you showed them how that works? Is there a place to test? And there's going to be a lot of other dependencies that they're working with, which, whatever app or platform they're developing. So it's so much more than just, throwing an API out there and expecting it to perform. There's just so many other dependencies and life cycle changes that need to be checked, monitored, made aware of.
And just to build on from that, I think one of the problems, if we take UK open banking, was the evolution of UK open banking started from a regulator specifying a sandbox before they'd actually defined what open banking was. So the banks rushed out to my sandboxes to deliver open banking, but that had ended up having no bearing on the delivery of the service. And one of the comments that we've heard from developers and frustration from third parties who integrate to the banks is that they built in good faith two sandbox implementations that turned out to be very, very different to the production environment. I think that's very much a duty of care that people should have with their API products, as Caroline said, to provide consistency and maintain that the services work. Something I know we've all discussed before, but you need to validate that what you are documenting and what you have built is what you are supplying, and that's something I think a lot of people tend to forget. And it comes down to
that's a good idea, David.
It is a good idea, and it's part of what I think Andrew and I are calling runtime governance versus there is a lot of emphasis at the moment on your life cycle governance, the design in security, test for security, test for performance. But a lot of that's done theoretically in the design and test phase. And there's a bit of runtime, that's DevOps, we'll leave that to them. And we'll pretend, and we end up with these two silos of the security, or these silos where the security team does one thing, the design team and the DevRel team do another, and ops do their own thing. And actually, we cannot afford as an industry, and businesses are realizing they can't afford to look at it that way, that actually these are products, your business is either dependent on the consumption of them or your customers dependent on your delivery of them. And you can't just assume somebody else in the organization is taking the 10,000 meter view of the problem, that it is actually something that everybody is on top of. And my belief is we're going to see a lot more concern, particularly in tightening financial times as we may be coming into, of hang on, we need to be assured that what we are paying to deliver and what we are paying to consume are delivering what we expected. And if they're not, we need to have an business escalation system that we can actually rely on. And if we look at the governed sectors, financial services, healthcare, insurance, that are becoming prevalent around the world, they're going to need something to protect themselves from either valid regulatory oversight, where you have done something wrong, you can be fined, or just spurious partners complaining to regulators, potentially just to hide something that they've done. And we've seen both of those scenarios happen in the UK, where regulators have got involved in disputes between parties, where both parties can come to the table with proof the other one is lying. And that's not a situation that's sustainable. And as we're seeing from some quite large IT organizations, they are realizing that they can't just mark their own homework. They need to have a way of agreeing between them and their customers that if we say something takes 1.2 seconds, it does actually take 1.2 seconds and not 1.8 or 5 seconds. It's just having trust between the parties that the data actually is true. And if you rely on what your gateway tells you or what your internal logs tell you, you can end up with a very, very rosy view of the universe that doesn't actually match reality. And I think what we're moving into a phase of maturity in the sector where people actually, they don't necessarily care if something is good or bad, they'd like it to be good, but they need to know that the numbers that everybody's talking about can be trusted.
Yeah, that's a great point. And here is a good follow-on question to your point about siloed organizations and this kind of fragmentation. As APIs move from being just technical endpoints to being managed as API products, who owns them where does the budget generally come from, and how do you deal with priorities in larger organizations?
Well, that's a good question. I think large organizations, my view is large organizations are currently still trying to figure that one out themselves.
Yeah.
But I think what we're starting to see is a almost seismic shift in a lot of API decision making away from developer teams into line of business and product teams, where the product teams have ownership of the API stack and everything related to it. And they're just starting to realize, as they peel these onion layers away, that actually it's not just about we've bought an API from provider X or we're supplying an API, but what cloud is it running on? What is it underpinned by? Are we using a CDN service? Is that CDN service reliable? Who do we get who are we using for identity management? Who are we using for security? Does the security monitoring do what we think it does? Or have we just bought something because it looks shiny and they had a really good write-up on a tech news blog? There's a lot of questions. I think we're moving into an era again of maturity. This sector didn't really exist 10, 15 years ago. 10 years ago, it was in its infancy. We were still dealing with, less than 10 years ago, we were still dealing with Twitter continuously destroying business models for people, where they'd open up an API and then get rid of it within a year. We are moving beyond that. People now accept they have to stand behind their APIs and they have to have those solutions. But I think what we're going to see is product management and product owners will own technology stacks, and then they will work with different silos within their organization to provide quality on that. And I think that will then...
We're seeing that too, David, is in where companies big and small are changing the way organizations are organized and function. And we're seeing product teams really being elevated to, a VP product, where whatever falls under that, again, it's treated like a product, and all the pieces around what needs to make that successful are really, really important. Where product before might have been, it's just the group over there that's developing stuff, where it's definitely being elevated in all sorts of companies we're seeing now. It's a good thing.
No, I absolutely agree. And I think particularly what we're seeing in banking and banking technologies is the product owners are the ones actually taking, they are becoming more and more important to these solutions. And it's less just I want something, I'll build it, I'll throw out an API, to we need to have a strategy across the entire organization. It needs to be designed for PSD2 in Europe or what have you, or open banking in the UK, and we need to take these factors into account, and we can't just build something, throw it out there and get on with it.
Yeah, and the key is too, it's just not elevating product for the sake of elevating product. Product then becomes a strategic function of the organization that then needs to think strategically, needs to think across the company, needs to think about go-to-market, needs to think about support, it needs to think about all of those things.
And needs to think about the tooling and the platforms that they use for actually managing that, I feel.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Good segue. Are you seeing a convergence of kind of tool chains and ecosystems in terms of registries, gateways, life cycle tooling? Are you seeing convergence, or are you seeing increased fragmentation across the industry?
Are we allowed to say both? I think people are being more thoughtful, and there are more tooling systems that are being built, and things like APImetrics, which is there to be able to provide a lot of that monitoring. But there's also new companies coming on that are creating, more fragmentation. So we're still in a bit of a messy space right now, is what I'm seeing. Curious, Mariana or David, what you're seeing.
Yeah, I think that you're right. This is, although, for example, in the UK, open banking was born in 2016. We're talking about 6 years ago. It's very nascent. It's early. It's still early for an initiative this big. It's still early. So firms, everybody's still learning and trying to find a way how to get involved and properly in these new ecosystems, right? So yes, I think there's still a lot of fragmentation. There are new services that are emerging. There are platforms that are there to be the central point of consuming and distributing APIs, and regulations are also different. There are not even like global standard definitions of some terms, so I think that yes, as Carolyn said, I think it might be a little bit messy right now. There's a lot of fragmentation. Developer experiences, as we said earlier, are very different. Developer portals are not, some are, have a high score, others not that much. But I think that the global market is maturing. I mean, differently in each region. But I think this is part of maturing, of growing. Yeah, fragmentation.
Well, the regulatory bodies are catching up with that too. So really, companies don't have much of a choice. It needs to be properly monitored and built.
Exactly.
No,
sorry, go ahead, David.
Well, I was going to say we do see the same. That I think there was a feeling in 2021 that perhaps we were going to see some more consolidation in the gateway and infrastructure server technology space, and actually it's continued to. There are more gateways emerging. There are new entrants all the time, and we haven't seen that degree of consolidation. We do see a lot of churn that companies move their tech stack more than you would perhaps think they would. Particularly in the gateway space, there's a lot of I think that's more fungible than people expected it to be. But I think there's still, that's because they're not sure, they're not getting quite what the gateways sold them on, in terms of, I think the gateways were sold as this one ring to rule them piece of magic that would solve all of these governance problems. And actually, because of where the gateway is, it's uniquely placed to not be able to do that for anybody. And anyone who's gone down the route of thinking, yes, picking someone at random, Apigee can solve all my problems, or MuleSoft can solve all my problems, have found out the hard way that actually, no, it doesn't give them what they needed to answer some of these regulatory questions, or answer customer questions, or even plug the gaps in their own coverage of, well, hang on, can we prove that we are a secure solution that's effective? So yeah, I think there's as Mariana says, we're still actually it's a relatively new industry, and it's still finding its feet.
Great. I think we have time for one more question, and this one is about developer experience scores. Wonder if you can talk a bit about your experience and what some of the best practices and worst practices are for calculating DX scores and using them to optimize your developer programs.
Me?
Yeah, sure.
Well, yeah, as I said, I mean, basically at Platformable, we do a research of many aspects in this open banking, open finance world, and particularly in developer experience, we just track what are the resources that are made available, right? But we are not measuring the quality yet. Hopefully we can do that in the future. So, but as I said, and I insist, what is the point of exposing features, resources in your portals if they are not going to be functioning or working well, right? I think, for example, what regulators are interested in and requiring the institutions are, you need to put a channel for developers to consume your APIs. You need to use clear language for easy to understand. You need to have a team that can solve issues. and if there's any disruption or anything that can be solved. You need to have a sandbox environment, right? Like I said, minimum requirements that that firms need to comply with, but that's not enough. I mean, that's a minimum requirement. That's not enough. If you really want to thrive, if you really want to engage with developers, you really need to put out there, like, for example, description of use cases. I've seen portals of banks that are very detailed, and they show customer success stories. They show description of use cases. This can be used like that. Even forthcoming APIs. Look, we're in a beta stage for this API, and this can be used for X and Y and Z use cases. So for developers to start saying, oh, okay, this can work for this, and I don't know, it's I think that companies need to give all the easy tools that can help developers to create value.
Well, companies need to realize that the B2B approach doesn't work, or even within banking, they're used to a B2C, business to consumer approach, doesn't work for the B2D or the business to developer approach. It's different. It needs a different approach. There's different ways of doing it. It's not hard. It's just different.
That's a great point. I like that B2D.
Well, and I think the bit that's certainly harder for the financial services sector, and is some of the B2D approach that they have. Those developers are actually other banks and other large institutions working under the same regulatory framework, and I think that's something that people have. It sounds like a subtle nuance, but actually you're suddenly dealing with quite large organizations who also are not sure. They're finding their way as well. So I think there's a bunch of complexity there that has been forgotten about. That it's just, well, hang on, we're a big company as well, and I thought we were doing the same things, but why is your stuff wildly different to what we do? And I think that's, that comes back to, we need tools and we need tools and systems that allow us to understand whether we're talking, even if we're talking about apples and oranges or apples and bananas, understanding what the commonalities between those different fruits is and what they look like.
Okay, great. With that, we're at the top of the hour, so we'll go ahead and wrap up. Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, Mariana. Thank you, David. This has been a great discussion, and we will share a link to the recording afterwards, and it'll be available on YouTube for sharing as well. So thank you, everybody, for joining today.
Thank you.